Hello and welcome to this evening's edition of Conspiracy Watch, Conspiracy Truth, Conspiracy Anonymous, whatever you want to call us is fine by us. All we're trying to do is enlighten you as to certain frauds which are happening under our very noses. Tonight we have Sandy with us, who is a local inhabitant of the Cotswolds, so we are discussing the Cotswold election frauds which have been going on over the last, well, certainly for a few years, if not longer, and how they actually, in turn, make it easier to defraud the public at a national level and beyond, globally as well. So, Sandy, hello, nice to have you with us.
Well, nice to be here, Robin.
Great. And would you please start by introducing kind of how you got involved with this and where you're at with it now?
Yes. It really started through my own education. I started education in '62 and it went on until about '77. And I was dyslexic, and of course at that time the government didn't admit that dyslexia existed. It only admitted it in 1981. And then it admitted to assess and treat really into the 90s, usually pleading expense. And then in the 90s they got better funding and there was the equal rights. But by that time they'd set up a system where they were actually systematically, the assessments were omissive and the adjustments were distortive. And once I'd realised that, I started looking a bit further and I found an academic book by a woman called Philomena Ott. I think it's published 1997, How to Detect and Manage Dyslexia. And the first chapter is titled 100 Years of Delay and Debate. And in there, it describes that in fact dyslexia, congenital dyslexia had been published by, in the BMA, case studied and published in 1896 by Dr. Pringle Morgan, and acquired injury dyslexia had been case studied by a man called Hinchelwood, who then went on actually to describe how dyslexics should be really supplied with oral or audio curriculum in conjunction with a written curriculum. Once I realised that there was that level of corruption able to be imposed, or cock-up, but corruption as well, able to be imposed on the education system, of course I started to look at other things and that weren't working properly, clearly weren't working properly, and of course the election system is one of many. That's how I got into it.
Excellent. And at this point in time, how long have you been attacking this particular area, in our local constituency?
Well, particularly since about 2005, I started writing to our constituency MP really about the excessive pay, expenses and pensions that they were getting. And then, not to my surprise, of course, there was the expenses scandal in 2009. So my correspondence with the MP in the Cotswold constituency predates about his pay and expenses and their general pay and expenses predates actually the exposure of it, because in fact actually that fraud had been going, that conspiratorial fraud had been going on for 50 years, since about 52 or 54.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they managed a tremendous damage limitation exercise on that.
I guess this would be a good opportunity to ask, how do they get away with this kind of thing? What is it that is being done behind our backs or in front of us that we're not quite aware of and that we can't see or are not paying enough attention to?
That's such a big question. I'm not quite sure how to answer it. I mean, I could bore down slightly specifically into election fraud.
Right, yes, that would probably be
one way of describing it.
Yeah.
Well, in the case of election fraud, the way to outline it, if they can defraud the local elections, which they do systematically, that stops ordinary people getting involved in politics at all, because that's where ordinary people would actually get started, and that therefore protects the party politicians above. So they have particular systems whereby they systematically defraud our elections. And the one that I came across specifically in 2011, when I stood as an independent candidate, was their rural local election systematic conspiratorial fraud. This involves all the mainstream parties. where they operate undeclared parties in the rural local elections, where party political members of all the mainstream parties, Tory, Labour, Liberal, Democrat, UKIP, and Green, stand, and in the vast majority of cases, they don't declare their party political membership or their party political support, or that they've been privately approached and invited by party political members and are really acting as accessories or surrogates for party politicians.
And it's as bad as that even the Greens are involved?
Certainly, the Greens are involved, certainly at the level that they are not condemning this practice in their manifesto. None of the mainstream parties are condemning this. And so essentially they are therefore at least accessories, if not actually directly implicated.
Okay. So is it fair enough to say that we as a public at the moment are not only not aware of what's happening, but that perhaps this might be fair enough to say that we are apathetic?
Well, because, I've described just one system of fraud, which was the rural election fraud. Perhaps I ought to backtrack and say that they have another system of local election fraud in the in the town areas, which they then emphasise in the city areas. So in the towns, they generally, at the local elections, they generally do declare their party political membership. But they only do that because they've supersized the size of the electorates in the wards in the town areas, and then they've super-duper-sized them in the city areas. So, for instance, Robin, in the parishes, in the rural parishes, the local electorates will usually be between 1 and 500 electors. As soon as you get into the towns, they increase by tenfold on the whole, from about 1,000 to 5,000, small towns. Then the local so-called, and they're so-called electorates because they're not really local once you get up to that size. And that plays into the hands of the parties. And then in the cities, they do an even bigger similar version where the so-called local electorate is actually about 9 to 15,000, which isn't local at all. And it means that ordinary people can't get involved unless they join the mainstream parties, because it's only the mainstream parties that have the promotional power and inertia to be able to win such large-sized wards.
It also sounds to me like supersizing the wards such as that would take the face away from who's doing, from who you can talk to in terms of politics. It used to be, wouldn't it be fair enough to say that usually you could walk down the street and the people in charge, if you like, would have a face that you could put to their name. Everyone would know who they were, for example.
Yes, that's right. Once you start to have so-called local electorates that are actually in the thousands, or in this case over 10,000 in the cities now, the vast majority of electors simply do not know their so-called local councillor, or don't even know them by sight, don't know them by name, certainly don't know what they stand for, and therefore they are reduced and almost essentially forced to vote for parties. So simply the supersizing the ward makes it actually non-local, and that plays into the hands particularly of national parties. So that's the fraud that they're operating in the cities and towns, and then out in the rural areas where the electorates are genuinely are local, they then operate these undeclared parties where the candidates actually aren't declaring their party political membership or support or association, they having been privately invited behind closed doors to sign.
Right. And I mentioned apathy already, but another area of this is the fact that people are not participating anymore in politics in their local areas. Community seems to be quite separated these days. Would you say that a lot of this has led us to that?
Absolutely. The politicians talk about the electorate and the general public being apathetic about politics, but in fact it is the party politicians, by practicing these conspiratorial frauds, they're rigging the elections in their mainstream party or party's favour, and therefore, of course, that stops anyone getting engaged, and so of course they are apathetic. But it is the anti-competitive practices, indeed the conspiratorial frauds, that are creating the apathy.
And I don't know if I mean, I don't know really anyone in my village at this point well enough to say that none of them are having conversations about defrauding and about how we can fight back. But one of the things that is the first to come to mind for me is what the hell can we do about it?
Well, of course, the first thing is to inform people that this is going on and to observe it. In the Cotswold constituency, for instance, the election results are published by the Cotswold District Council because that is the local election authority. And if you go onto their website and click on election results, you will find a list of all the concurrent election results. If you click on, so they'll have the national election results from 2010, and they'll have the EU election results, and they should have the local election results. That is the parish and town council, the 87 parish and town council election results for the Cotswold constituency. But if you press on the word parish, and in fact it's parish and town, they like to cut out that it's towns. They try to make it seem insignificant. You click on it, and the results have been disappeared. They're not visible, and they've been repeatedly hiding the very area that we've been discussing and I've been pointing out are actually fraudulent, because simply by looking at those election results you are able to see that overwhelming evidence that they are systematically defrauding these elections.
So that's why they've made them invisible.
That's why they repeatedly make those particular election results, that is the 87 parish and town council election results for our Cotswold constituency, disappear, because they know that they're defrauding these elections, and they know that once they're caught for defrauding the local elections, that means that the whole bang shoot are caught, because of course, as I said earlier, if you defraud the local elections, that's where normal people would get involved and get experience and get a reputation as independent candidates and so on and so forth. And if they can defraud that, that then protects the mainstream party politicians above. So this is a pyramidal, conspiratorial fraud.
As indeed we've discussed on many other areas, how there's always the hierarchical structure in place with most institutions, if not all of them. Which, hierarchical being the pyramid structure, and fewer in the know as to what's really going on. So would you say that this is also somewhat compartmentalised, that people aren't aware that they're really involved with what is more than just local? If we get to the bare bones of this, how it is systemic, how it does breed into national
and global, corruption. Certainly. Obviously, if you have someone in a local town or village, or even in a city, they will, on the whole, only be aware of the immediate fraud in their own area, and they're able to marginalise or dismiss that. So they know that there will be, they'll probably know in a rural area that Conservative or Liberal or Labour or UKIP candidates or even Green candidates are standing and not declaring their party, not declaring their policies, just simply standing and not filling in any description on their nomination ballot forms. But they will think, oh well, it's so local, it's insignificant, and it's probably only local to our area, and anyway, what can local politicians do? But in fact, if you don't
if you don't change anything at the local level, then really the national level they can do what they like.
All sorts of things go wrong if you actually allow fraud even at your local level. It seems petty, but in fact it's very, very significant, because if your local councillors don't have a genuine public mandate, they are actually tied in stealthily with the national party politicians. They have no public mandate with which to stand up for local interests against the county interests or the national interests, who are actually more senior in their party. So once you get local politics corrupted, then nationalisation and globalisation are able to step in, which have done it over the last 60 to 80 years. Firstly,
fair enough to say. Sorry to interrupt you, but to say that that is really quite obvious now how so many things have become nationalised and globalised and continue to be so. So at this point, and I can also agree with Sandy in regards to the Cotswold District Council webpage. If you go on there, you will see it's very blatant. There are the town elections, Cirencester and Barnsley and such, and in the middle of all of the blue links, the sea of blue, there is this parish and town elections results, which if you click on, it's black. It doesn't take you to the page to view the election results. I mean, how much more blatant do you want to be? I mean, that's the question I leave to you. In regards to summing up here, I think consequences we can kind of sum up quite quickly if you'd like to.
Well, I mean, briefly, as we've said, if there isn't a proper mandate locally, the councillors really cannot stand up, and that means for you, particularly if they're tied in with the national parties anyway, which most of them are, and stealthily so. And therefore, the local services, local utilities, local resources get nationalised, and they have been over the last 60 years. And then, of course, you get them globalised. Because once things are nationalised, local people have lost control. They don't know anything about it, and the distinction between nationalised resources and utilities and services and globalised resources is marginal to the normal elector.
It's pretty hard for me to find out actually who owns what anymore. Is that something else that comes from this? That it's quite easy for them to hide then even further in the shadows.
Oh, indeed. Yeah. I mean, most of our British UK business now is actually owned by people abroad. They're absentees and they're anonymous, and of course the profits, a lot of the profits are going abroad, and a lot of the taxation is going abroad, and a lot of the control is actually abroad. And the power is actually narrowed down even globally to, in many cases, 5 or 10 global corporates that are completely controlling a particular sector now.
Okay, well, thank you very much. The last thing I'd like to ask is, can we name and shame?
Well, yes. I mean, I've contacted, obviously, about this fraud in 2011. I complained to the local councillors about it directly, saying you are operating undeclared parties and here is the evidence. And there is enormous amount of evidence. The results that they've actually disappeared from the Cotswold District Council website contain, this is public records, contain the evidence that this is actually occurring, because just to backtrack here, about 29 of the 87 councils, exactly the right number of candidates stood for the available seats, and none of them declared a party. And it's quite clearly coordinated.
That sounds quite blatant in itself.
It's incredibly blatant. And then a further similar number, in fact rather more, about 35 of the councils, one too little stood. So not exactly the right number of candidates, but one less than the number of candidates needed stood. In which case, in both cases, there isn't a contested election. And this is rather like a council officer's job coming up, and it not being properly advertised, often being negatively advertised by the people around it, and only ever the number of candidates, or even less candidates, actually standing or coming forward to try and fill those posts. And coincidentally, all of them always coming forward, they're being internally filled. And it's quite clearly corruption once you actually see those election results. And in fact, in the other cases, council cases, the wards have been supersized. So there's evidence of every single Cotswold local election having been likely having been frauded.
And just for those who are unaware, what is the award?
Well, award is it refers to either the area of the town or city that is broken down into its constituent parts.
Regions.
Yes, so that you have, for local election purposes, you'll break a large town down into separate parts for the purposes of the local elections.
Okay.
As to naming and shaming, I complained to the local councillors, and it was quite clear that they're doing this. I complained to the returning officer who sat on the complaint for 3 months. He's called Nigel Adams. He is, of course, a permanent officer within the council, and then acts as the returning officer at the time of the election. So, of course, he's underneath the very people who are involved in this. I've complained to the CEO of the Cotswold District Council, a guy called, I think, David Newdegger, who simply wrote back saying it wasn't his business. I've complained... Yes. And he's in charge of the local elections. I've complained to the chairman of the Electoral Commission, a chap called, I think, Peter Wardle, and he got a minion to write back saying, actually, he couldn't really deny that this practice was going on in the rural elections. He ignored the supersizing in the urban wards, which I've been complaining about, but he couldn't deny that this practice of undeclared parties and candidates. And he said, well, that's all right, because it's not against the electoral law. But I was complaining about this being a fraud under our statute and common law. It's Section 2 of the Fraud Act. It's misrepresentation in order to benefit people. When you operate an undeclared party, you're standing for political office and you're not declaring your political party, you're not declaring your policies, and you're doing it in a systematic way. That is a conspiratorial fraud, and regardless of the electoral law. So he was using an economy of truth. He was talking about a little bit of the law, which I wasn't referring to, and saying, oh, but it's not against this. Typical civil servant operating an economy of truth. They omit to actually address what you're complaining about, and they distort. And it was very clear that he's actually involved in the fraud himself. He is misrepresenting in order to benefit. So they are all wrapped up in it, and some rather more consciously than others. But these people are paid to run our elections. And they either need to be run out of office for just total and utter incompetence, or run out of office for corruption, and I don't really care which, but they've got to be run out of office.
Okay, that's pretty much all we have time for right now, but I'd love to thank Sandy for coming along and sharing with us his, I think you'd agree, substantial knowledge on this area. I would implore all of you to write to these people, to get in contact with them, to let them know that you're aware of what's going on, to research for yourself on the website that we've alluded to, yes, the Cotswold District Council, so that you can see for yourself what is happening. And do your own research. Don't just take what myself and Sandy are saying as truth. Make sure you know it for yourself. And once you do, please help us. Help us to make a difference. Okay.
Help yourselves.
Yes, help yourselves. Yeah.
And look at your own election area. If you're not in the Cotswold district, look at your city area or your town area. Look on your local election results website, and you will see that one of these two frauds is being operated there, for certain.
Okay, on that note, see you again next time. Hope you're all well. Take care of yourselves. Good night.
Bye.